God called Abraham to go to a place he would lead him. Abraham obeyed and journeyed with his family, leaving the city of Ur, where he had been living, to embark on a quest for a land that God would show him. Abraham traveled to Haran, where he stayed until his father passed away. Later, Abraham would arrive in the land of Canaan, where he and his descendants would live until moving to Egypt during the lifetime of Joseph and the famine. Abraham's family would transition from living in an urban culture with all the comforts of city life to an agrarian lifestyle. They would adjust from the clay brick homes they had been accustomed to the goatskin tents of nomadic people. This would be the lifestyle in which Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and his family would live and grow and worship their God. Because of the terrain of the land in which they settled, there was a continuing need for good pasture land in which their herds could graze. Searching out new pastures to feed the animals and necessary water supply for all, they would be forced to move from place to place, along with the tents, supplies, animals, and family. Today, the nomadic Bedouin culture has maintained this lifestyle along the desert areas of the Negev and beyond. The living quarters of Abraham and family would have consisted of tents made of goatskin. The tent would have a long and almost flat top that was slightly higher in the center to drain any occasional rain that might fall. Curtains hung within the tent to give slight privacy and create separate rooms. The sides of the tent could be lifted to catch any breeze that might be coming through. Early on, the women would be separated in the same tent with a curtain hung between the men's quarters at the front of the tent. But as the family grew, each growing family would have a tent of their own. In the case of multiple wives and concubines, each wife had her own tent, but all concubines were required to share one tent. A reference to the tent of a wife was mentioned in Genesis 24:67. Isaac brought her, Rebekah, into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he married Rebekah. So she became his wife, and he loved her, and Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. There was little or no furniture, but rather cushions stuffed with goat hair or sheep's wool for sitting. Sleeping could have been done on these same cushions, or simply a roll of cloth placed on the ground. Clay lamps fueled by olive oil provided some light at night, or if a moon was bright enough on a clear night, a flap could be lifted to allow moonlight into the tent. Most activities took place outside the tents. Cooking and eating would have been done outside. Cooking supplies were limited due to the amount of constant traveling and the need to keep possessions down to a manageable size. Saucers, bowls, and cups were made of baked clay, while cooking pots for vegetables and stews would have been made from copper or bronze, as were the knives. Wooden spoons were used for eating and cooking, but the utensil of choice for eating was most often the fingers. A medium-sized flat rock was used as a grinding mill for making flour out of grain, and also used to roll out bread dough, with a round stone used as a rolling pin. Once the dough had been made from the flour mixture, it was rolled into round stone or shaped into bread, either round or flat, and baked on hot stones. Large clay pots were used for storage of grain, wine, olive oil, or milk, while moderate-sized clay pots were used to draw water from the well or spring. Goat skins were used to hold wine or water and carried with the person as they tended the herds or traveled to conduct trade. Outdoor oven pits were dug in the ground, usually 3 feet deep to 2 to 3 feet in diameter, in the shape of a large jar. The walls would be plastered with clay with a bed of pebbles where the fire was built. Sheep, goats, wild game, and fowl were placed on a spit and cooked over the open fire. The diet consisted of breads made of barley and wheat. Fruits such as grapes, pomegranates, olives, dates, figs, and other edible fruits were gathered for eating. The fruits were often dried for later use and sometimes mixed with flour for a cake-type bread. Milk was taken from the sheep and goat and also used to make cheese. Animals from the flocks were occasionally butchered, sometimes for special events, such as the arrival of an occasional guest. Nothing was wasted. Olives were not only used as a food source, but also for medicinal purposes such as stomach and intestinal problems, and also applied to wounds as an antiseptic. The fat of animals was made into soap for washing. Clothing worn at this time was usually made from sheep's wool or the hair from a goat, or from the flax plant. Goat hair is woven to make sackcloth, and coarse linen was made from the flax plant. Fabrics could be dyed using berries, flowers from plants such as lilacs, pomegranates, vegetables, and even certain types of wood. The finer the fabric, the more elaborate the coloring, the more expensive the garment. Flax did not take dye as well as woolen fabrics. Usually woolens were used in their natural color. A sleeveless tunic hanging from the shoulders was worn over a long tunic that was mostly white or off-white and had a waist girdle or belt of folded wool cloth tied around the waist. The sleeveless tunic could be used in many ways, from placing it over the head to protect from sun, sand, or wind, or it could be used for wrapping around the body during cooler evenings or sudden sandstorms when a cloak was not available. The long tunic was worn by both men and women, and it was made of two rectangular pieces of cloth joined in a long seam along the top with a hole left for the head to go through. It also had a seam running down both sides with holes left for the arms. It could be tucked up at the waist if heavy work was being done. Both men and women wore a loincloth, the equivalent of underpants. This was a long, thin strip of cloth wound around the waist and then between the legs, with the end tucked at the waist. Women probably wore some sort of binding around their breast. Sandals were worn to protect the feet from stones and briars found in the desert. Sandals were made of leather or wood, bound to the foot and removed before entering the tent. Preparing for bed was simply a matter of removing the outer cloak or sleeveless tunic. Most slept in the same clothes worn during the day. Women wore veils, but both sexes covered their head with a turban. When women went into a public place, they wrapped their long hair in a piece of cloth. This cloth held their hair in place and acted as a head covering in the hot climate. It could also be used as a face covering. Cosmetics were worn by women at all levels of society. They manicured their nails and outlined their eyes in colors including black, green, aqua, terracotta, and charcoal. Makeup, especially for the eyes, was popular. Both sexes wore bracelets and earrings. Other ornaments were nose rings made of precious metal or ivory, the signet, which was suspended by a string, necklaces formed of perforated gold drops strung together. The anklets, a special ornament for the women, was connected with step chains to announce their coming and to attract or drive away the opposite sex. Joseph lived in a patriarchal society. The head of the household had complete authority in all family matters. The father would be the one to determine what activities in which the entire family would participate. He had final authority on all political and military issues, including with whom to make treaties or covenants, or when or with whom to make war. All decisions must have his approval. He was responsible for the welfare of all of his family, servants, slaves, and livestock, which included housing, food, and clothing. The patriarch would engage in trade and in the purchasing of all products. In religious matters, the patriarch would offer sacrifices for the family to his God. In the case of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, altars were built and sacrifices were placed upon the altar in the worship of Yahweh. In the area of social matters, the patriarch determined the clans or families in which to associate with and engaged in festivals, meals, and other family celebrations. It would not have been acceptable for the daughters to travel to visit other families unless the father approved. The patriarch also acted as judge in matters concerning the family. He had the authority of life or death and would be the judge and jury against crimes committed within the family unit. According to the Nuzi tablets found by archaeologists in Iraq, in the case of marriage, the fathers of both the bride and groom arranged the marriage. These contracts between the two families did not require the bride's consent. The bride was to be given a handmaiden whose name would appear in the contract along with the bride and the groom's name. The groom would give a gift to the bride's father that was to be put aside for the bride in case she was widowed. If the groom or his family did not have money to give the bride's father, the groom might give the gift of labor, as was the case of Jacob when he worked for 7 years for the right to marry Rachel. The bride's father would pay a dowry to the groom as part of the agreement of marriage. If money was not available, the bride's father might offer a share of the family estate. It was very important for the couple to produce an heir. Children, especially males, ensured the perpetuation of the family line, and the more children the couple had, the more prestige and respect they would gain. A large family, according to their beliefs, signified a blessing from God. It also meant an heir would be produced to leave family property and manage family affairs. It was someone to leave the birthright and take over all the patriarchal duties, including caring for the head of the household in old age and arranging a proper burial when the time came. In the case of many sons in a family, the birthright would be given to the oldest son unless there was a specific reason why that he should not inherit the position, as was in the case of Jacob's family. This is the family culture in which Joseph lived. He learned many things as a child, the most important of which was knowledge of Yahweh and the selection of his family as God's chosen people. Joseph would soon develop a faith in his God that would sustain him through the many trials and hardships he would experience until Yahweh would reveal the plan he had prepared for Joseph to bring about the fulfillment of a promise God had made to Abraham concerning his descendants in a foreign land for 400 years.